Indeed, Olive, thank you. We've had two presentations on health sector responses, and this reflects, I think, where a lot of the energies have been going over the last decade. We've put a lot of efforts into addressing the health outcomes. But now we're going to turn to the criminal justice sector and hear from Honourable Justice David Batema about what's been happening in Uganda in terms of developing responses to IPV. So, David.
Thank you. I must begin by apologizing in advance that I'm not a good timekeeper. We are taught to take our time and decide matters when we are sure that that is our final conclusion. We can even adjourn for a week and come back and conclude the matter. However, I'll try to conclude within this session. What you were not told is that when I finished my law school and practiced law for about 4 or 5 years, I discovered that the law was male. And I went back to school to read another degree in women's law and a postgraduate. And I got lost in the forest of women's law and human rights, did a master's. And when I came back to Uganda from the University of Zimbabwe and the School of Justice in Copenhagen, we began a jurisprudence of equality project for magistrates and judges. That was 2000. I also took on part-time lecturing at Makerere. You can see my dean is here, School of Women and Gender Studies, Dr. Kabonesa. And since then, I've got lost, completely lost in this field that if you went to the Judiciary and asked for Mr. Batema, it would be hard to find me, but if you asked for Sister Batema, it is easy to find me. You'll assist me with that. I may not be good at pressing the right button. By way of introduction, I should say there's a culture of silence around IPV. And there are religious practices prohibiting public discussion, cultural practices prohibiting discussion of intimate partner violence. And when I use domestic violence in this workshop, I'll actually be referring to IPV because most of it occurs in the domestic sphere. Go on. It was not after the Mexico Women's Conference in 1975 that countries began looking at violence against women as a human rights violation, and then began talking about criminalizing violence against women. And we began looking at the various forms which you have discussed here for the last 2 days of physical, psychological, sexual, and economic abuse. What are the current legal protection we have in Uganda? Oh, we are lucky we have one of the most gender-sensitive constitutions in Africa. Wherever you go, so, oh, Uganda, you've got a nice constitution. Oh, Uganda. But this came as late as 1995. It is so recent. It's a baby. We are nurturing it. And in this constitution, all forms of discrimination are condemned, more so discrimination based on sex and gender. And our Constitution recognizes individual human rights, fundamental freedoms of the individual, and calls upon the state to protect them. It clearly expressly states that human rights are not granted by the state, but it's the first duty of the state to enforce them and to make sure that they are enjoyed by every person. All laws and customs that are inconsistent with the Constitution are void. They are not null and void, but they are void to the extent of the inconsistency. So we pick out the good one and we throw away the bad part. As far as the Constitution is concerned, we look at your culture, we look at your custom. But to my father and mother in the village, they think their customs can't be changed. Little do they know that they are dynamic and they can change with time and from place to place. Here we are. We had to put it in the Constitution, Article 2.2. Women can confer citizenship because it has been a source of IPV, whether this child born to a white man belongs to Uganda or belongs to Germany or to America, whether this child should pay in dollars or shillings at Makerere. And the Constitution had to put it clear and say anybody born to a parent, whether female or male, who is a Ugandan can, confer citizenship. Equality and freedom from discrimination is expressly provided in Article 20 and 21, and they give the prohibited grounds: sex, tribe, race, ethnic origin, blah, 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 blah. And these are not exclusive, they are only inclusive. And we can enforce other rights not stipulated in the Constitution by virtue of Article 45. More relevant to IPV is respect for human dignity and protection from inhuman treatment. I'll give you the detail of that. And then we have the rights of the family, where equality is provided for at the time of entering marriage. You are all equal, and whoever is going to join you into holy matrimony must ask both partners whether they are ready for it. And so consent becomes paramount, that you are equal, free and full consent. Then during marriage, there are questions which arose in the promulgation of the Constitution. Who is the head of the home? And sometimes when I'm talking to the reverends, I ask them, who is the head of the home? And they say the Bible is very clear. The man is the head of the home, just like Jesus Christ is the head of the church. Blah, 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 blah. Then I pull out my motto: Jesus is the head of this home, the unseen guest at every meal, silent listener to all, blah, 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 blah. And I have to retract what they first said. But equality at the dissolution of marriage is still a big problem, and it's causing IPV. For most women who know that they will not be equal at the time of dissolution of marriage, and they know they will not take away anything from the marriage, they will break what is breakable and burn what is burnable. Affirmative action is provided as a constitutional right in our Constitution. And using this article, we are able to craft remedies in all spheres of life, public and private. Whether you are a ministry, whether you are a court, whether you are what, you can do affirmative action. Whether you are a bank, yes. The rights of women are so clearly provided. Composition of parliament, a third must be women. There is a constituency for women to represent women at every district in parliament. Then articles 126, 127, 128 about judicial power and judicial discretion call for equality and no delay of action. We shall see whether justice delayed is not justice denied, and whether justice hurried is not justice buried. Composition of local councils is also a third. Continue. Now, I wanted to pull out about 3 details of the Constitution. Why? Because they are the basis of our effort in trying to prevent IPV or condemning it. Article 24, no person shall be subjected to any form of torture or cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. And that's where we find IPV. This right is non-derogable, meaning no amount of administrative intervention, no orders from above can take away that right of not being subjected to torture, cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment. Continue. Article 33 about the rights of women. It says women shall be accorded full and equal dignity of the person with men. In simple terms, in Uganda, the Constitution is saying women are equal to men. In all spheres of life, political, blah, 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 cultural, religious, and that's where our problem is with IPV and how best we can do affirmative action and change society. Now, the Constitution does not only provide for the rights of women. No. It says the state shall provide for the facilities and opportunities. Now, that is a constitutional duty. It's not enough to provide for the right to education when you know there are no facilities. It's not a right to say you are free from torture, cruel, inhuman, degrading treatment when there are no safe shelters, when there is no medical provision. So this one is very important for us as we look at efforts. The state shall protect women and their rights. Now, doesn't say protect women. You protect women with their rights. And it's important for the judicial officers, for the police officers, for the law enforcement officers to know what are these women's rights. What is so unique and natural, maternal a function about women? Are we there? Article 32 calls for affirmative action for women and marginalized groups on the basis of gender, age, disability. And what is important for us here in tackling IPV is to understand and interpret clause 2, which says laws, cultures, customs, and traditions which are against the dignity, welfare, or interest of women or other marginalized groups to which clause 1 relates, or which undermine their status, are prohibited by this Constitution. And this is a faster vehicle for law reform in Uganda, for enforcing laws that prevent IPV. If you know that there is an existing law, you can modify it. You can discard it in your judicial work. You can discard it as a police officer and say, oh, that old law does not work. And nobody will take you to, to task to say, follow the old law, if it's obsolete. Continue. Article 274 is the vehicle for judicial activism. It has provided us with a platform to change the existing law because it expressly says, subject to the provisions of this article, the operation of existing law after the coming into force of the Constitution shall not be affected by the coming into force of this Constitution. But the existing law shall be construed. Now, construing is the work of the judges. Interpreting, putting it in context, shall be construed with such modification, adaptations, qualifications, and exceptions as may be necessary to bring it into conformity with this Constitution. Let's move on and see how we have applied this in judicial activism. Uganda is signatory to these international laws. I've cited CEDAW, UDHR, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the one on social cultural rights, Convention Against Torture, DIVAO, and the UN Security Council Resolutions 1325 and 1820, criminalizing sexual harassment or use of sex in times of war or on refugees for provision of services and the Goma declarations. The African Charter is here. It specifically says where the national constitution is lacking, all member states of the African Union shall revert to international conventions and declarations. Why am I pointing out all this? Continue. It's because many of us have gone through university and we have practiced for years without hearing about gender equality. You'll see a judge, you'll see a magistrate, and you assume that we know all. After all, we call ourselves the land brothers. We are not land. We are ignorant of some of these international human rights standards. At the national level, we are like the past parliament, not the present parliament. The past parliament passed some gender-sensitive legislations. The Domestic Violence Act 2010, the Prohibition of Female Genital Mutilation 2010, the Prevention of Trafficking in Persons Act 2009, the Penal Code Act, as amended in 2007, created compulsory testing, screening for HIV/AIDS, and if you have HIV/AIDS and you have done it with a child, it is aggravated and carries a higher sentence. The Magistrates Courts Act provides for hearing cases of a sexual nature in camera, and then the International Criminal Court, the Land Act providing for protecting women, blah, 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 blah. The Employment Act and sexual harassment. Continue. Where is the capacity to enforce the law of red, the constitutional provisions? We are saying we have got the Uganda Human Rights Commission, Equal Opportunities Commission, we have got a functioning judiciary, family and children's court all over Uganda, the Uganda Police Force, local council committees, and I think there is political will in some quarters, but we shall see where the problem is. Press on, I'm warned I have very little time. Now, we have approached our entry, strategic entry in the judiciary by training, and we have targeted 3 objectives: to increase substantive knowledge on human rights, the root causes of gender inequality, violence against women, girls, and its consequences. We are also equipping judicial officers with the skills of interpreting the law with gender lenses, and we are trying to develop a positive gendered attitude. Continue. Now, attitude takes time, but the skills we must see, quick results. We are using case law reports, journals, video drama. I myself am an actor and a writer of films, and we are using them, and they have sold all over the world. I'm usually in Uganda for 1 month. The next month I'm flying out to talk to other judiciaries, other justice, law and order sectors on how to use these films. I've got a list of about 12 of them. Participants learn how gender affects men and women in terms of opportunities, power, privileges, status. And we emphasize that men use violence to maintain the status quo. Move on. Participants problematize the existing law. We want you to differentiate what is natural, what is normal, what is usual, what is obvious. And we say men don't cook. Obvious, natural, normal, what? And you'll find different answers from the judges. What can you do as a judge, as a magistrate, prosecutor, and lawyer to improve the protection of the rights of women? Is constantly asked. Next. Yes, those are training. Gone. These are major topics we handle: introduction to gender and human rights, violence against women, gender biased and gender neutral laws, gender stereotypes, international human rights, gender sensitivity, and judicial activism. Move on. Yes, there I am training judges there. Now, what's the takeaway package? Graduates take home a certificate of attendance, carrot and stick. Box files of selected materials, now that we have given them the interpretation, let them go home. If they lack the library, here are the materials to start with. Flash disks, yes, we put on all the relevant materials they may need in the courts or in their communities. If they are going to address lottery, Lion International. The other day I was called by Dr. Sentumbe to address doctors. And then they were so amused that he was asking them, do you play oral sex? He said, no. Yes. And I said, do you wash your wife's sneakers? Some said yes or no. And I said, now which is more dirtier? Oh my God. We have had to change the police form number 3 so that the doctors we have in court are not limited to the surgeons. We are now using the nurses, the traditional birth attendants. If they can tell us that this child has been abused, that evidence must be accepted. DVDs and CDs, yes. Video drama, yes. Addresses of several data banks so that they are able to find this information on websites. Visual artwork for practical and academic use. I sent out a Christmas card with the wheel of power and control and then equality. Whoever would read the Christmas card finds that wheel there. What do you do with your spouse during Christmas? Come on. Changing roles of the court, now we are not concentrating on adversarial system. We are saying, can we do alternative dispute resolution? When the women come to court, they are not seeking for divorce. All they want is the violence to stop. They're not looking for imprisonment. Who will pay the school fees? Who will pay the rent? So you have to look for alternative sentences. Counseling, we are now counselors. Arbitration. Referrals, yes, we are now learning referrals. You can omit obtaining medical evidence because Dr. Sentumbe almost covered that. Move on to almost the last slide. Opportunities for improving. Now, let's share this one. Use of referrals. Police and courts are now referring to NGOs, CSOs, which have the facilities, which have the shelters. Legal aid is now a government policy. The other day, Afande Kahindo Tafire was launching legal aid. What do we do with the poor who cannot afford legal service? We are referring them to legal aid. Center for Justice Centers, they are now right in the courts. Police, family, children protection units are everywhere. And recently I was engaged with the police, Cats of UN Women, and I developed a gender curriculum for all the police schools. So now we are going to have police officers coming out knowing what SIDO is. And when you say SIDO, they don't say, see what? Prosecution and proper sentencing. You know, we have been playing with these perpetrators of violence. 2 years, 1 year, 3 years. The other day, Tina Msuya was calling me, oh, I'm dancing in my office. I've seen 65 years. Oh. I said, yeah, that's proper sentencing. Let's have guidelines. Yes. What is the guideline saying? Instead of, was it cutting grass in Kenya? Yes, we are giving them 50 years, the 30, the 45. The battered woman syndrome is a legal defense only in America. In Uganda, the courts and the judges have said, if you want to say you were provoked, you must hit back in the heat of passion. You are not offered that defense of provocation if you don't act immediately and hit back. For me, I'm saying there is accumulated anger where a housewife may not react immediately. But after 2 weeks or 3 weeks, if you repeat it with impunity, she will react with fatal consequences. And that one should reduce the sentence or should mitigate the sentence. Or murder should be looked at as manslaughter, where it is arising from a domestic sphere with a history of repeated domestic violence. And I've given you precedents. Let other judges differ from me with good reasons. Yeah, there we are. I think training, we can cooperate in training all over East Africa. But can't we have protective orders enforced Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi? What is so private about these orders? If you commit IPV in Kenya and you run to Uganda, Uganda should arrest you and take you back. We don't need repatriation. The order should be enforced within the communities. If you are Sami of Uganda and you run to Sami of Kenya, they should bring you back. Female genital mutilation is a major problem across borders. And can't we cooperate in that area? So that when it comes to the Pokot Sabinyo of Uganda running to the Turkana of Kenya, we are able to cooperate. Where else? Continue. I think we have a problem with shelters and facilities. Here I was in Moroto at a police station. You can see the station diary being filled in at the police desk there. You can look at the chair the judge was offered. It's a trunk of a tree. You know, lack of facilities, and where will you have the privacy of interviewing the victims if you have such facilities? Oh, terrible. So we are saying, if we put together our heads, judiciary, police, health services, and then the communities, and we get a referral path, and we cooperate in training, I think there will be a lot to be done. Isn't that the last one? Come on. Yes, I think we are talking about criminalizing cultural practices of bride price. Should a woman be valued in terms of chicken, cows, or pigs? Oh my God. We want the UN women to help us, or you, wherever you are, help us with this coordination, because the media house has not put their acts in order. If you listen to the messages on radio, on TV, the newspapers, they are all gender insensitive. If you talk about parliament, yes, Dr. Sentumbo, we have formulated these guidelines because we are technical people. But these vegetable growers in parliament will not pass laws according to what we have designed. Talk about marital rape and says, how can you rape your own? And then we have precedents in the UK, and they tell you that is a law of 1783. So the other day when I got a chance to talk to the parliamentarians, Cuts of Plan International, we did training over 3 months, and I trained 180 members of parliament. And they are saying, now we can understand marital rape, yes. And I gave them cases from Masaka, where we have convicted somebody of marital rape. Said, this is terrible. I gave them cases on protection orders, and one member of parliament said, we didn't pass that law. And I brought out the law. I said, if you are violent, we shall send you out of the home. Said, maybe that day I didn't attend. I didn't know this law. I thank you for listening to me for lack of time.
Well, thank you, Sister Batema. That was a very different perspective than I think we were expecting. Thank you very much indeed for an entertaining approach, but also because in the title of the presentation was Response to IPV, but I think what you brought out was how the criminal justice sector can do so much to prevent IPV if it's correctly organized and structured and people adhere to it and the mechanisms are there.